All right, everybody. That time to get rolling. Everyone had a nice weekend. Beautiful weather. Time to get outside and get some exercise in. So today we're going to talk about some common injury fixes related to strength training, and then we're going to look at some more form correction for strength training as well. Let's get rolling. All right, so obviously with the current situation we're all working and training from home. Most of you are not professionals in the strength and conditioning industry like myself, so you may run into some aches and pains from training. It's very common. It could be due to improper form or even just an overtraining of a particular exercise or a particular muscle, just doing things too many times. And even myself, as someone who's been doing this for close to 20 years at this point, even I still run into some issues now and again, usually on the overtraining side of things. So we're going to look at a few common injuries that might occur during in-home style training when you're not having the proper instruction. And then I'm going to go over some common ways to fix those issues. Maybe not fix them, but at least alleviate some of the pain that people have. I've mentioned this before, but my background is on the sports medicine end of things. So this comes in handy for me when I'm dealing with kids and Gen Pop adults when I'm doing like personal training and stuff. We do spend a lot of time just basically patching up injuries and getting them back on court, or for my in-home or for my adult clients, just dealing with the everyday aches and pains that people get as they age. So obviously we have acute and chronic injuries. Acute injury is defined as a traumatic impact or event focused on one part of the body. It's usually a muscle, a bone, or a joint. So these can range, but you're looking at like muscle ruptures, things like concussions for like head injuries, or tendon or cartilage tears. These are traumatic things that are going to happen, and we're not really going to be able to deal with those. This is stuff that I dealt with in my prior capacity as an athletic trainer. Dealing with on-field injuries was actually one of the reasons I got out of it, because I didn't want to have to deal with those types of injuries, because they can be pretty scary. So obviously these are not the ones that we're going to be focusing on today. Just kind of want to give you a sense of what an acute injury would be. We're going to be looking at more at chronic injury. So chronic injury is defined as an injury that develops slowly over time, persistent and reoccurrent. Chronic injuries can lead to acute injuries. So if you pull or tear a muscle, which is an acute injury, it's usually because of something chronic that you had been doing previous to that tear that just led to the stresses be enough to basically, the straw that the camel's back, as it were. And these are the types of injuries that we're going to discuss quote unquote fixes for today. And these types of injuries include tendonitis, bursitis, fasciitis, and basically anything with an itis at the end. That suffix just means inflammation. So tendonitis is obviously an inflammation of a tendon. Bursitis, inflammation of a bursa. Those are like small fluid little sacs that sit in certain joints. And then fasciitis is basically inflammation of a fascia, which is the material that wraps around muscles. And there's a bunch of other ones, but you basically get the idea. Anytime we're going to see some sort of inflammation. All right, so pressing problems. Many people experience pain during pressing exercises, and this usually occurs around the shoulder area. So pressing would be your bench presses, dips, shoulder presses, anything where you're pushing a weight or your body weight away from your body. Shoulder joint, it's the most complex joint in terms of the amount of range of motion that it can do. So it tends to run into a lot of problems. And this is a super common injury that I deal with in my capacity, working with our baseball teams, working with our tennis programs. Any of that overhead motion, they tend to get a ton of chronic problems around their shoulders. So this is something that I deal with a ton. The shoulder joint itself, this is from a front view looking at it. So this is obviously your arm, this is your scapula or your shoulder blade, and this is the clavicle, that bone up here runs to your neck. And most of the problems are going to come right in this area here. This is the acromion. This is a piece of the scapula that wraps around. And this is called the subacromial space. We basically have a bunch of tendons, blood vessels, and nerves that run through here and down into our arm. And anytime we're raising the arm up, you can see this little kind of protrusion here called the tuberosity. Basically, this runs up and it can jam all of those tendons, ligaments, and even the nerves sometimes. And that's basically, you're going to get what's called impingement syndrome. So everything in this area is impinged. And basically, it's usually caused by an anterior rotation of the shoulders, which means basically your shoulders are rounded in. And then when you start doing that overhead motion with that rounding into the shoulder, it decreases the space in that subacromial space, and we get that impingement and that pain. So what we're going to do for pretty much all of these is, if you're having a problem on the front side of your body, like so if we're having pain here, it's usually going to be the muscles in front are overdeveloped, the muscles in back are underdeveloped. So what we then need to do is get the muscles up front to relax, release, become more open. Then we need to develop the muscles on the back side. So a common way to do this for those shoulders that are rotated forward is we do what's called a pectoral release first, using a lacrosse ball, baseball, even a golf ball. She's using here a like kind of spike ball, like a therapy type ball. And it's basically, you're going to take the pressure of that ball and push it directly into the pectoral muscle itself. The pectoral muscles are obviously used during any press that we do. And this basically just tricks the muscle into relaxing. We're then going to do it for our lat, which is the muscle on our back. It's the largest muscle in the body, and you can see she's laying on top of a lacrosse ball here. If you've never done this, this is extremely painful. And just trying again to get that release, get that muscle, get that lat to relax. And the lat starts in your back, but it wraps up around your shoulder. And I'll go back here so you get a sense. The lat comes up around here and actually connects right about here. So when the lat contracts, it actually rotates humerus forward. So if you have rounded shoulders, more than likely you're going to have overactive lats. So once we've done these two, you're spending about anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes holding pressure. Same thing for here. We're going to work on activating muscles in our back, specifically the external rotators of our shoulder. And that's demonstrated here with this external rotation. She has a towel that's going to be placed between her arm and her body. And this basically, again, just opens up that subacromial space here. Then we're just doing that nice external rotation. If you've ever played tennis, or if you've ever baseball or any of the sports that involve a lot of throwing or overhead motion, this is a common exercise that we do during warm-ups. Again, it's because in those sports we're overdeveloped on the front side and underdeveloped on the back. So we need to really start developing those external rotators. And just for, moms and dads and stuff who may be listening to this later, we all tend to have this forward posture just because of the amount of time we do things like this, sitting in front of a computer, sitting in front of a screen, sitting at a desk. We tend to be very forward facing, and everything kind of rotates forward. So just doing these as a preventative measure is also very helpful. This is something I do a lot, releasing the pec, the lat, and then the next one we're going to talk about, which is the bicep. I still play a little bit of recreational softball and stuff, so I have to work on my shoulder pretty much every spring except this one. All right, so pulling problems. Pulling exercises, obviously we're looking at seated rows, dumbbell rows, lat pull downs, pull-ups. Again, anything where you're pulling something towards you or you're pulling your body up in the case of a pull-up. And some people do experience pain. The most common cause is going to be overactivity in the biceps. The biceps are one of those muscles very much like the quad. They like to take over for everything. So the minute I start doing a pulling exercise, and we'll actually talk about this later in the form correction stuff a little bit more, but the biceps just tend to be very, very overactive. All right. So again, this is going to be a front to back kind of problem. We have overactivity in the front. So we're basically going to want to get that to relax, and then we're going to want to get the muscles in our back activate just a little bit more. So we're going to start with release of the biceps, and we're actually going to do the posterior capsule of the shoulder. This is a little bit different than the lat. It's just a little bit higher, and we're actually getting into the back side of the shoulder capsule. And essentially why that is because the way the bicep attaches in the shoulder joint, if the bicep tears or becomes super overactive, it actually starts to harm the cartilage that's on the inside of the shoulder. If you've ever watched baseball and you might have heard of a slap lesion. Pitchers get it a lot, and that's basically when that bicep tears the cartilage inside of that shoulder joint. So getting the backside of that capsule, because it's going to become irritated because of all of the pulling the bicep is doing. This is the best picture I could get of the bicep release. This guy, he's actually all over with releases and stuff, but this is just a funny picture. This would be against a wall. So the wall would be in front of this man here. And you're starting in the center of the bicep and kind of rolling just up and down just a little bit. Obviously, it's the bicep. The reason it's called that is because there's two of them. There's a long and a short head. So you'll want to get a little bit on the outside and then a little bit on the inside. The one on the outside tends to be the one that gets a little more inflamed. And again, if you've never done any of these rolls or releases, this position and this position are also extremely painful. Just be ready for that. All right, so after we've released or relaxed the muscles up in front here, and then that the posterior capsule in the shoulder, we're going to look now to develop the lats and the rhomboids. The rhomboids are the muscles that sit between our shoulder blades and basically get our shoulder blades to squeeze together. So when I'm doing a seated row, a dumbbell row, lat pull down, those are the muscles that pull the shoulder blades together. And again, we'll see this a little bit later when we talk about our form. So this is a great exercise for the activation in the back. This is called an IYT. You start in what we call a prone cobra, where we're going to lift our torso up and off of the ground. Her head should be tucked a little bit there, but that's fine. And then we start with an I motion. So that's coming straight up. That's going to get a little bit of our traps and our rhomboids activated. Y position, where we raise up into a Y. Again, looking for that activation. And then the T, this is straight rhomboid, straight in the center of our back here. So again, with all this stuff, we're looking to get something that's overactive to relax and something that's underactive to be active. Almost any injury that you're going to run into on the chronic end of the spectrum is going to be a muscle imbalance of some kind. Just it's out of control. All right, so gripping problems. This is actually something I run into a ton with my Gen Pop adult clients. Just because of the amount of time spent on computers. So like the men and women who I train who are in the business field, they tend to be very overactive on the flexor part of their forearm, which is like the underside, the big side, just because of keyboards all day. So they can have pain just gripping a bar or gripping a very light dumbbell. Just the activity of squeezing our hands together for them actually causes pain on the outside, on the backside of their forearm. This is most commonly known as tennis elbow. There's also golfer's elbow, which is the exact opposite. We're talking about the more common one, which is the tennis elbow. So we have an overactive muscle on the front side, underactive on the back side. The difference between the grip and like the bicep and the pressing stuff is actually because the flexors are so overactive and so strong, they actually put too much stress on the extensors or on the muscles on the other side, so they cause pain on the outside. That's it's a little bit different. The only other place this happens with is in the ankles and the shin in something called shin splints. So basically tennis elbow and shin splints are the same exact mode of injury, just in opposite ends of the body. What we're going to do is we're going to release the forearm extensors, and that's basically because they're inflamed. It's called an epicondylitis. It's that little node on the backside of your forearm here. It gets really, really painful. If you've ever had tennis elbow, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So she's doing this on a table. I prefer to do it against the wall. And you would just basically pin your arm, put a ball on the wall, and press right below that point on the bone, right in like the meaty part of that outside of your forearm. Again, if you've never done this, and if you have tennis elbow, this is very, very painful. You know, you're just going to press as much as you can take in terms of your pain tolerance, holding for about 1 to 3 minutes. And then after we're outside of pain, we're going to try to develop that extensor side because they need to be a little bit stronger. But directly after the forearm release, we would go into a stretch for the flexors. And actually, I have to correct that. I apologize. I'll fix that right after this. But so basically, this is a stretch for the muscles on the inside of your forearm. She's doing this standing pulling. You can do it against the wall like this, or you can do it actually on the ground. Just placing your palms down, fingers in. And then again, once we're post-pain, so once we've been doing this and this for an amount of time, and that pain starts to go away on the outside of that forearm, we would add in an exercise like a wrist roller. A wrist roller is something you can buy, or you can just take a broom handle, drill a hole through the center, get a little bit of rope, and just basically tie any sort of weight to the opposite side of it. And you basically wrist roll. You're walking that weight all the way up and all the way down. And that's an excellent way to build up the muscles on the backside of your forearm there. All right, let's jump into some form correction stuff. So we're going to look at the 3 form things that we're going to look at today are actually problems that we were talking about just now. So the press, the pull, and the grip, and basic ways to take the motions that you might be doing that are causing problems and make corrections so we don't end up having those problems. That's why I talked about in the beginning, if you're not exact on your form, can eventually lead to these chronic style injuries. All right, so a flat press, and that's an amazing thing, but the internet is also terrible because it's filled with people who don't know what they're doing. This is a picture of someone doing a flat press. Basically, our elbows and shoulders at a 90-degree angle. Okay, so it's a common way to do a bench press, but if you're dealing with someone who's either in the gen pop, has overactive and rotated in shoulders, or you're dealing with an athlete who does like throwing style motions, this is a horrible way to press. It's generally the reason why, minus a few exceptions when working with athletes, I never do straight barbell press because you have to have your arms out at that angle. I mean, it just puts a little bit overdue stress. Again, you know, going way back to the beginning of the presentation, part of your humerus or the arm bone comes up and just jams that space completely closed. So we really don't want to have our elbows out at that 90-degree angle. Obviously, other than that, his elbows are in decent line and stuff, and it's a decent press. And I always do my presses with my feet up on the bench. It just makes it a little bit more core-centric. How you want to be, this is on an incline as opposed to a flat, but it's the best photo I could find in terms of the 45 degrees. We want to have our elbows down at a 45-degree angle. Basically, the way I coach it, when I would have someone down on a bench, basically I would say, we're going to rotate the dumbbell. So the flat part of the dumbbell, this part of the dumbbell, or this part of the dumbbell is pointed at the corners of the room that you're in. That'll put you in a nice 45. At our Morristown facility, we have dumbbells that are called hex dumbbells, and they just have a contour to the outside that actually it rotates it perfectly, and the dumbbell sits nice and flat at that 45-degree angle. So when he comes down, that elbow stays at that 45. We still have a good forearm position. So we're driving straight back up. And again, that just drops that arm down just a little bit. It frees up that space in that shoulder so we don't get any of that friction that we would get with this type of pressing. And again, it might not feel like you're doing anything bad. It might just feel like your shoulder's tight or something like that. But with the chronic injury, if you're continually doing this kind of press, it might start out as it kind of feels a little bit achy when you're doing it. And then the next day you wake up and your shoulder's a little sore, but once you get moving, everything's fine until, 3, 5, 6 months down the road, eventually you have pain with every motion you're doing on a press, or if you try to reach up and grab a can of soup out of a cupboard or something like that, you're going to have pain. And that's basically the telltale sign of an impingement style syndrome. So if you're doing pressing at home, any sort of dumbbell work, always make sure we have those elbows down at that 45. That's a much more natural motion for the arm, and it's just a better way to train and know that you're not eventually going to end up with some sort of shoulder problem. All right, seated row. So I use this as our pulling, just because it's a little bit easier to see the positions than a lat pull. This picture is a little bit fuzzy, but I'll try to walk you through it. So we talked about, when we were talking about the bicep and the overactivity of the bicep, this is a perfect illustration of what's going to happen during a seated row or a dumbbell row, which is that hand basically tries to pull in the bicep, which is basically that bicep curl. That's basically what we're doing, is we're trying to curl up and in. The biceps just love to take over on an exercise like this. And again, bicep is firing super hard. So what happens to the shoulder? It rotates forward, it rotates in. And again, that just puts that subacromial space, that little space underneath your shoulder blade there. It just gets everything all jammed up, on top of the fact that the bicep is just trying to do all of that pulling. What you want to see is a big open chest. My shoulders are back, right? My rhomboids, those muscles in my back, are nice and active, right? They're squeezing everything back, avoiding that rounded shoulder. And then when I row, you can see he's even a little bit steeper than I would like to see. I'd like to see that hand down around here, almost at like a 90. And basically what you want to see in terms of, like, if you're looking at the forces, it's basically an arrow going straight through that elbow back, right? So whenever I'm coaching this, I tell everyone, pull from the elbow, meaning I want this elbow to come straight back as far as I can. It's not that the cable or the handle gets to my body. We can see both are at the body. It's just that to get that handle to the body here, we use the big bicep. And to get the cable or the handle or the dumbbell to our body here, we use the elbows and the back muscles, the rhomboids, mid traps, lower traps, lats. All of those muscles that should be active are active. This is something when dealing with general clients, it's a very hard thing to grasp at first, again, because the posture generally of people in Gen Pop, they have this rounded shoulder. So as soon as you have the rounded shoulder and you go to a seated row, it's immediately going to look like this. In like a lat pull or a pull down, it would be similar, except I would see the shoulder up by their ears. So they'd basically be up like this when they're coming in for like a lat pull down. So setting everything in the proper position and understanding where the pull needs to come from is very important. Again, make sure we're not overdeveloping that bicep. Everybody loves working on biceps, but it's one of the, I'm not going to say it's a dangerous muscle to develop, because that's, you want to be developed all over, but overdeveloped bicep can lead to a lot of injuries if you're not careful. All right, and then finally, we're going to talk about gripping. So on a press, I was taught many years ago that both of these were called false grip, but apparently this is not called a false grip anymore, or my teacher was wrong. So if I'm in a pressing position and I do everything with false grip, because I do have overdeveloped forearms just from tons of baseball over the years. So this is what's called a false grip. And it basically just means I'm going to take my thumb and I put it on the same side of the bar as my fingers. Okay, so this in a pressing exercises works in two different ways. One, with the thumb on this side, I would automatically be squeezing the bar. Again, working those flexor side of the forearm, which I don't want to be doing. And when I'm in that position as well, when I'm in this position as well, it's actually pulling the wrist back, which if you remember what that stretch looked like, it's basically the same thing. So you're getting an active stretch and you're not over activating the flexors by having that grip position. And when you're pressing, if you're using a dumbbell or a barbell, you really shouldn't be gripping too hard on the bar because you're just wasting energy. And then same thing on a pull. So this is apparently called a suicide grip. Again, I was taught thought that it was a false grip. So here we're doing a pull. So basically think about like you're looking at someone doing a pull up here. With this, again, the thumb on the same side, that's that grip, that's that squeeze, that's that flexor muscles working a ton. We take the thumb and we flip it over to the back side of the bar. Obviously, we're still getting some of the flexors. We're still getting some of that grip, or else you wouldn't be holding onto that bar. It just takes out a couple of the muscles, and it essentially just tones down the amount of work that those flexors are getting. So if you're someone who has tennis elbow or anything like that, and you still want to try to train, but it hurts when you're gripping things or it hurts when you're holding things, this is the way that I correct this when I'm working with my Gen Pop adult clients. It's generally how I teach kids to hold things when we're working in the groups. So basically that's all we have for today. I want to do more of the form corrections and the injury side of things. We'll get to the core stuff and the lower body stuff, I think in a few weeks, just because the amount that goes into something like a lower back injury, there's a ton of information. So I want to try to figure out a way to present it in a manner that's interesting and useful without getting too deep into the weeds, and just talking about epicondylitis and things like that. If anyone has any questions, there's only a couple today, so if you just want to pipe up, if you have anything you want to ask, feel free.
Hey, Tim, it's Robert. How you doing?
Hey, Robert, how are you?
Great. So I've had that issue with the subacromial impingement, and of course, I went to a doctor, and what he wants to do is surgery.
Surgery, sure, yeah.
He says that 1 out of 3 people have a little hook in their bone that causes more impingement, and he saw it on mine, so he immediately said, let's do surgery. But he didn't even obviously suggest any of the things you're suggesting. So I definitely want to try some of that, because I do a lot of barbell and with a straight bar, and I've never been told otherwise. So it's interesting. Yeah,
it's I mean, obviously you go to sure they're going to tell you to get meat. You go to a surgeon, then they're going to tell you to get surgery. Yeah, I mean, I would try some of this stuff first. If you're going to stick with like a straight bar press, what I would say is narrow your grip just slightly, and then tuck the elbows when you come down. So the bar would be hitting, as opposed to like a standard bench press where the bar comes down basically across the nipple line. Generally, if you go just a little bit more narrow, we basically want the bar to come down around the sternum, so like the base of like where your ribs connect in front, and that lets the elbows just drop down a little bit to the side, and again, it's just a little bit less stress on shoulders.
That's perfect. Thanks.
No problem.
And I heard you said you're going to do some lower back and back. That'd be great. Also, maybe you could also do a little bit of a section on just postural. You touched on it today. I think that's a big issue, like you said, for a lot of people.
Yeah, we did cover posture in one of the previous ones, but when I go into the lower back stuff, it's inevitable that I'm going to have to go over it, because it's a huge part of why people have lower back problems.
Excellent. So, yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Tim, this is David. Thank you for this.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good. In the future, I look forward to, you talk about addressing some lower extremity issues. I'm on the healing side of a groin injury from a burpee now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know if you want to get into that now, but I did have another question about pull-ups and reverse pull-ups. Are those good to maintain a balance between the anterior and posterior?
Sure. I generally don't let kids, especially my tennis, baseball, things like that, players, do the underhand pull-up, just because it really, really leads to that over-activation of the bicep.
Yeah.
So I only let them do an overhand or a neutral. And I mean, for myself, I don't even do an underhand pull-up ever. Again, just because I've had shoulder injuries in the past, just playing years and years of baseball. So I know when I start doing those underhand pull-ups, that right shoulder's just going to start hurting on me. So it's usually neutral or overhand.
But can you run past that again? What happens when the bicep is overstrengthened? It pulls on the shoulder joint?
Yeah, so the bicep runs up and connects, see if I can
To
go
the,
back here. Sorry about this. Okay, so this is actually the cartilage that's inside of the shoulder joint itself. One of the heads of the bicep connects on one of these tuberosities here, but the other one actually wraps up and connects to this itself, and a piece of the bone, obviously. So when that bicep pulls, when the muscle here flexes, it's actually pulling on this piece of cartilage. And if it gets too overdeveloped and too strong, or you're doing a big explosive motion like pitching is when it normally happens. I mean, I've seen it happen with someone doing lift actually, but this basically gets pulled and ripped. It rips on both sides. It rips, it's again called a slap lesion. It's superior lesion anterior to posterior. It tears on this side and it tears on the back side. And it basically looks like a bucket handle. It's called a bucket handle tear. It's just the overdevelopment of the biceps, specifically the long head is what can kind of lead to that. So as someone who works primarily with people in sports and primarily with people who have bad postures to begin with, I just try to avoid it because it's a common injury, unfortunately.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, guys. Well, appreciate the interaction there. I hope everyone enjoys their week, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Take care.